Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to go and make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher, and this is the television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And our hope is that as you're watching, you'll really engage with the content, maybe take some notes down, and you'll be able to use this information to really step into conversations with people and share your faith.
Yeah, and as you're watching, make sure you get connected with us on social media. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show. We'd love to hear from you, so make sure you leave some comments for us.
And we have some news in case you haven't heard. Our podcast, the podcast version of this show, is available on iTunes and Google Play. You can listen to full episodes, or you can catch some of our other podcasts. So just search Reasons to Believe podcasts on iTunes or Google Play.
Great. Now let's kick things off with a rundown of today's show. In Culture Talk, Sandra will be talking with Jeff Zweerink about the new Netflix series, Lost in Space, and how it can spark up the conversation about search for life on other planets.
Danger, danger. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, sometimes if I'm trying to share my faith, and we hit obstacles in doing that, so it might be hard to figure out what the next step is. So in our Nexus segment, we'll ask advice from Amy Hall of Stand to Reason on how we can keep going when we run into obstacles in sharing our faith.
Then in Give and Take, Jeff will talk with apologist and philosopher Ted Cabal about the Galileo Affair.
I wonder what that is all about. And speaking of wondering, a lot of people have been wondering where Ken Sample's Straight Thinking podcast has gone. It still exists. It's back. And in our RTB News segment, Monica will talk with Ken about how listeners can find his podcast.
But first up is RTB 101. Krista will talk with Hugh Ross about the Great Commission.
It was really disappointing. We saw a Barna survey recently that showed that 51% of Christians don't know what the Great Commission means.
Yeah, that's a very important part of our faith, so let's check that out.
Now it's time for RTB 101. This is the segment where we talk about practical questions to help equip you to share your faith with friends and family more effectively. And I'm here again with my colleague and evangelist, Dr. Hugh Ross.
How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
And Hugh, recently I saw that there was a Barna study that 51% of Christians don't know what the Great Commission is. And since the name of this show is 2819, I think we better talk about this.
Okay.
What is the Great Commission?
Well, it is in Matthew 28:19, which is basically Jesus telling his disciples, I'm calling you to go out into the entire world to preach the gospel.
And that is the responsibility of every Christian.
Right.
And so part of this show is helping our viewers get equipped to do that. Now, I think that you are one of the preeminent evangelists of our time. And I don't know if I've ever told you that, but I really believe that. And I think that that is going to be one of your great legacies. And the thing is, though, that sometimes we as Christians have a tendency to think that what we need to do is get all our unsaved friends lined up and bring them to the person that has the gift of evangelism. But that's not really how that works, is it?
No, because you won't find the gift of evangelism in Scripture, which you find instead as a command for all believers to be involved in evangelism, which is basically presenting the good news of salvation through Jesus Christ. And then after they give their lives to Jesus Christ, equipping them to become effective disciples, which means you actually equip them to be effective in bringing other people to faith in Jesus Christ. Because nobody can do it by themselves. We need to be raising up people to be able to do that very thing.
And there was another study a couple of years ago that showed that a large number of Christians think that sharing their faith is important. They think we ought to be doing that. Like it's a high percentage, like 85, 90% of Christians think we should. But that it's actually a small percentage of people who actually do
it. Right.
And it's like maybe 10% or less. What are some practical steps that we could take if we are not actually engaging in the Great Commission? What could we do to start doing that?
Well, 1 Peter 3:15 says, develop good reasons. If you don't have good reasons, you're going to be terrified about sharing your faith. So develop good reasons. Then get out of the Christian cocoon. A lot of Christians surround themselves with nothing but believers. They don't have any contact with unbelievers. And that's what Jesus said, go out from Jerusalem to all the parts of the earth, which means actually mingle with the unbelievers out there and let your character in Christ shine. That's another component that we see in 1 Peter 3:15. We're to share these good reasons with gentleness, respect, and a clear conscience. So we need to build that character of Christ within us, but develop the good reasons, then practice. Don't be surprised if the first few times you share your faith, it doesn't go well. It's going to take practice, but guess what? That practice is going to help to build Christian character in you. That's a good thing for yourself personally.
That's so good. And so if I don't have any unsafe friends, maybe I better get some, or maybe I better start hanging around some places where unsafe people are.
Or go to an airport. I mean, go someplace where non-Christians hang out.
But what I've done is I just started asking the Lord to bring me some unsaved friends in my life so that I could have some more people to talk to, because if you have surrounded yourself with Christians, you've got to start taking those steps to get some more unbelievers in your life.
And they don't have to be close friends. I mean, you can talk to people in the grocery line. I mean,
I love that.
When I go for a run in the morning, I meet people and talk to them. So
everywhere you go, bringing the kingdom. Yeah. I love that. And then I think your second piece of advice there is just so good that it might not go well. And that's been so true as I've learned to share my faith. But don't let that deter you.
Well, realize that God's got options. If he wanted it done perfectly, he would have sent the angels. Okay. He sends us sinner human beings instead. Why? Because he knows we're going to benefit from sharing our faith. We're not just benefiting the people we're encountering. It's going to have a personal benefit for us. So get started.
Take some risks.
Take some risks. Realize you're probably going to make some mistakes, but you're going to learn from your mistakes. And I've often found it's good to actually talk to the non-Christians and say, tell me where I'm being obnoxious in my presentation.
Asking for feedback.
Ask for feedback, and I found out they're really willing to tell you.
That's so good. Got to be brave to do that.
Right.
So Matthew 28:19, that's what this show is about,
Correct.
And that is the Great Commission. And I want to encourage you to check out Hugh's blog, New Reasons to Believe. It's at reasons.org. Next up, we're going to hear from our friend Amy Hall from Stand to Reason. I caught up with her recently and asked her to share some practical tips to help us keep going when we run into obstacles in evangelism. Let's check that out.
Most of the time when you talk to someone, you're not going to have any trouble at all. Most people are willing to talk to you about Jesus and Christianity, and they actually will enjoy it. But there will be times when you will have people who will not be nice to you and will push back on what you say and maybe even get angry at you. But this isn't really a bad thing. I want people to understand that when we face opposition like this, it's actually something really beautiful, and it acts as an apologetic in itself. Because one thing it does is that it reveals Jesus to other people. When someone's coming at you and they're attacking you, and you respond with grace and you respond with kindness that they don't deserve, you're actually showing them who Jesus is. There was a pastor named Richard Wurmbrand who was in communist Romania in the 1950s, and he was in prison for being a Christian. And the guards would beat him, and then he'd go back to his cell and he would pray for the people who had just beat him. Now, he was praying for the people who were destroying his body and showing them grace. Now, hopefully that sounds familiar. That's what Jesus did for us. And what actually happened is that the guards who saw this, they actually saw Jesus for the first time, and they became Christians because of what he did. So it really does reveal Jesus to other people, and that's a beautiful chance for us to get to do that. But it also shows Jesus' value to other people. Think about what Pastor Wurmbrand did again. He could have at any time denied Christ, walked out, everything would have been fine, but he didn't. And every guard who was watching him could see that he valued Jesus more than he valued his own comfort, and not even comfort, just lack of torture. And that speaks volumes to people when you continue to persevere, no matter what people are saying or doing to you. You are saying to them how valuable Jesus is. And now another important thing to remember is that the people who are angry with you, their problem is ultimately a spiritual problem. And we are only with Christ because saved us, and we didn't deserve it. So you have to remember to be humble, and to be humble when you're dealing with these people, because it's only by the grace of God that you are not in the same position they are. So how do you keep going as this is going on and on? Well, I had to ask myself this question because I got a little bit burned out for a while, and I went back and I read all these stories about people like Pastor Wurmbrand and a bunch of people, because I wanted to know how they kept going and why they didn't quit. And what I found was that every one of them, what it came down to is that they loved Jesus more than anything else. These people, when you read about what they said and how they lived, they loved Jesus. So if you want to persevere, you have to cultivate that love for Jesus. You have to seek him, you have to know him. You have to know your Bible, you have to see who he is. You have to see his humility and his grace and his love. And you need to be captivated by that vision of Jesus. And that's the only thing that will keep you going.
And if you'd like to hear more from Amy Hall, visit str.org. Now it's time for Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of faith and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. Today I'm joined with astrophysicist and author of Is There Life Out There, Jeff Zweerink. Thank you for joining us.
Sandra, it's good to be here today.
We're going to be talking about a new Netflix series. It's actually a reboot of Lost in Space. Now, the original series, is that before your time, or did you watch it?
I've heard about it, but I've never actually seen the show itself.
Yeah,
so.
same. I think it's before my time. But with the new version, I've seen the first episode, and it's done really well, highly produced, great show so far. But one of the questions or the statements that a main character makes is that they've landed on this planet. It's not toxic. The atmosphere, the gravity, everything is Earth-like. And she calls it a Goldilocks planet. She says it's something that it's unlike anything that has been mapped before. Can you explain first, what is a Goldilocks planet?
Well, in Star Trek, that'd just be an M-class planet, But no, so a Goldilocks planet, I mean, if you remember the story of Goldilocks, Goldilocks comes into the bears, and the mom stuff is always to something, the dad stuff is to the other way, but the baby stuff was always just right. And so that's kind of really what it's referring to there, is that when you're looking at planets and their capacity to support life, the planet needs to be far enough away from the star, but not too far. Because if it's too cold, it's too hot, or it's too close, it's too hot. If it's too far away, it's too cold. And so that's what it's getting at. There's a lot of things about planets that are necessary for life. And to get it all just right makes it a Goldilocks planet.
Yeah. Well, good. So then what she also says is that the odds of finding a planet like this, it's like winning the lottery. So what are the odds? How many exoplanets, we call them, or extrasolar planets, have been found, and what do they look like?
Well, as of right now, we found about 4,000 of them. I mean, it's a little bit less than that, but that's a remarkable number. I mean, when I was just starting graduate school, the number of exoplanets we'd found was 0.
Wow.
So, it really shows how the technology's developed, and our capacity to find planets outside our solar system has grown tremendously, because that's a difficult task. As of right now, there are a few planets that reside in that habitable zone that are roughly Earth-size, and what they mean by habitable zone is one that's far enough away from the star that it's not going to evaporate all the water, but it's not so far away that all the water will have frozen out. And there's a lot of other things that play into that. But as of right now, none of the planets we found are we sure that they can actually host life, because you got to have the right you got to be obviously the right distance from the planet, or from the star, but it also matters what kind of atmosphere is there. In fact, the atmosphere is probably a bigger effect than the distance from the star in some sense. But you also need a planet that's large enough that it can hold water in its atmosphere, but not so large that it retains a lot of methane and ammonia, which would be kind of toxic to life. Right. So there's just a lot of things that play into there. And as of right now, we've not found any planet that clearly meets all the requirements like life or Earth does here. In fairness, we can't actually find our solar system if we're around another star. So there's a lot of room left to grow, but a lot of things indicate that the Earth's a pretty unique planet. Yeah, well, that's good to hear that, one, it's unique, but also, two, that there's room to grow. So in that room to grow, sometimes there can be articles that say, an Earth-like planet has been found, and it can be exciting for people like me who love science fiction and science fantasy, but as a Christian and for other Christians, it can kind of be scary too. How do we engage that, and what does that mean
from our faith?
Well, the first thing, and one of the things that I realized that helped dispel almost all of that fear, is just a recognition that what God has revealed in Scripture, that as we go out and study His creation, we're never going to find anything that contradicts that, because God is a coherent God. So just to not worry about that, and where we seem like there's a conflict, that just means we need to go dig in deeper. And so where they say, oh, we found a habitable planet, well, you go and you start learning and say, what do we actually find? And it turns out that we don't know anything about the atmosphere or whether there's water on these planets. But just to kind of dig in and get past the sensational headline, to dig in and say, okay, what have we actually found? And what I have found when I have done that process is I have never found anything that the science has settled on and that is confirmed and really strongly supported that contradicts with what Scripture has to say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So if people want to learn more, then they can check out your book. Is there life out there?
That's a great place to go look.
Wonderful.
Lots of neat questions, lots of good stuff to explore.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Jeff. And now Jeff is going to run over to his set for Give and Take. He's going to be talking with Ted Cabal about the Galileo Affair. Let's check it out.
Hello, Jeff Zweerink here again with Give and Take, where we explore the latest scientific issues to help you be confident in sharing the gospel. And today we're joined by a special guest, Ted Cabal, and we're going to address a common charge against Christianity, that science and faith are in conflict, and all we have to do is look at the Galileo Affair to see how Christianity is holding back science. Ted, good to have you here on the set today.
Thanks for having me.
So this is just really a common charge that Christianity and science are in conflict, that Galileo was advancing the cause of science and Christianity was holding science down. And I know you studied that in your position at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, looked at philosophy of religion or not. So what are your thoughts? How do we deal with this Galileo conflict?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Galileo is that he had more to say about the relationship of the Bible and science than perhaps the theologians of his day did. And everybody involved in the conflict were Christians and believed in the Bible. And we may not know how committed they were in their personal lives, but what we know from their public lives and their writings is they all believed that they were interested in trying to uphold the truth of both the Bible and science in their best ways of thinking.
So this whole discussion then really isn't about science and Christianity, or Galileo the science being held down by Christianity. It's a discussion of how do science and Christianity relate, which we're still having today in a very real sense.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a grand cultural myth we may talk about later, but it is that science and theology are in perpetual warfare. The truth is, there have been potential conflicts from the very beginning, which is why the Galileo Affair is the most famous. It happens with the very first major science-theology conflict. Science is dated, modern science, from the publication of Copernicus on the revolutions, that book in 1543, which launches this new way of thinking about the Earth is no longer the center of the solar system or the universe. And when Galileo endorsed the Copernican worldview, or view of the universe literally, the Catholic Church at the time was troubled in response to the Protestant Reformation, and it didn't want him taking on interpretation on his own. The truth be known, though, he wrote at the time his own understanding of the way these sorts of things should be worked out. And I have looked at the way Christians have struggled with these issues through the centuries, and I was shocked. I didn't understand that he actually had the right proposal from the beginning.
That's a fascinating thing. Two things there. One, that this isn't new, that there seems to be this tension at times between science and Christianity. Yeah. And two, that there have been good principles set forth on how Christians have dealt with this. And I know you deal with this in a book, Controversy of the Ages. Can you kind of spell out what are those principles of how Christians should approach these science-faith conflicts, if you will?
Right. It's interesting when I actually looked, rather than just sort of the assumption that I hold, which is that, okay, the Bible is right and I don't want science telling me how to interpret my Bible. I just knew that that isn't exactly the way it's always worked. And whether it happened to be whether the Earth or the Sun is the center of our solar system, or whether or not dinosaurs really existed when people first discovered them, it shocked the idea of these fossils in stone. whether or not plate tectonics or the expansion of the universe and any number of other ideas, there was an immediate worry about them. Do these conflict with the Bible? And I call these on marriage terms, the conservatism principle from business, where you want to create a conservative financial statement. You don't overstate your assets, and you don't understate you don't understate your liabilities. Well, so in this principle that I discovered, all Christians, whether young earth, old earth, whatever, practice this through the centuries. At first, the response is the two can never wed. There's the marriage idea. They can't get along, so we're not going to consider it. But over time,
so it does really look like a conflict.
It looks like a conflict in many instances. How are we going to? We're dinosaurs. Are you kidding me? They were not in the Bible, so they must not exist. And yet, over time, the evidence mounts, and people begin to say, maybe there's something here. What should we think about it? I call that the second phase, where they begin to court. They consider, is there any aspect of that scientific theory that's possibly true? And finally, over time, they realize they had the Bible. They marry, the two marry, but they marry on certain terms, and that's where Galileo comes in.
So this is presuming that the evidence continues to grow and show that dinosaurs really do exist, or that hominids actually interbred with, or Neanderthals interbred with humanity.
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
They begin to say, you know what, we have to put these two together in some way, because the evidence of both is, we know the Bible's true, but how do we do with this new evidence? And they marry, but on certain terms. And that's where Galileo got it right from the start.
Well, and it seems like that idea of them marrying is kind of predicated on a couple of assumptions there. That, I mean, it's not just saying, oh, the science rules, we got to figure out how to reinterpret the Bible, is it?
That's exactly right. Galileo proposed in a couple of famous letters he wrote at the time, first of all, we assume the Bible is inerrant. This was his language. The Bible doesn't have any mistakes because God wrote it. But he said our second assumption is the Bible is not in conflict with the creation precisely because God wrote the book of creation. So those two assumptions then gave him the way to have two steps or applications of those principles to potential science theology conflicts. He says, if in the first place, if the science is not proven, then retain your traditional interpretations. But if the science is proven, and there's where the devil's in the details, but he says if it's proven, then it shows you misinterpreted the Bible. And what I've seen is through the centuries, this is exactly what conservative Bible-believing Christians have done. They've cautiously looked at this and applied this Galileo principle or proposal, and not always do we agree, or Christians agree, when and how to do this application. And in the case of evolution, some aspects of Darwin's theory we're still pushing back against, like universal common descent, much less evolutionary naturalism. But in the sense of, are there speciation events and whatever, that many Christians, including young earth Christians, will accept that. So it's not a law that says you have to do it this way. It's not written in the Bible, but it is the way that Christians have actually done this for centuries now.
You know, it really is a remarkable thing to think that over the last centuries, 4, 5, 6 centuries, Christians have seen what appears to be conflicts, and often dating to Galileo being the most prominent example of that. But as Christians have investigated the evidence and seen the evidence grow, they've recognized that the scriptures and creation are going to agree when we properly interpret them, because ultimately God is the author of both. And that gives us a freedom to enter into those controversial discussions, to evaluate what's going on, often to use the science as a bridge so that we can engage with those deeper matters. What does the gospel have to say about who God is and how do we relate to Him? So let's be excited and use this great opportunity to go out and spread the gospel. Now let's head over to Monica to see what she's up to.
Hey, I'm Monica Jones, and today I'm talking to philosopher and theologian Kenneth Samples. So we did a survey recently, and some of you have said, where is Ken's podcast, Straight Thinking? What happened to it?
You know, we had a long run on Straight Thinking. We did more than 300 programs. And then it morphed into the Imago Dei podcast, but Straight Thinking is now back, and so you can access it on the RTB website. on iTunes. So it's back. It's Straight Thinking 2.0 and with lots of topics.
All right. And what are some of those topics that you like talking about?
Yeah, we on the program, we like to emphasize rather than what to think, how to think. So there's always an emphasis upon using your mind to the glory of God, being a careful, critical thinker. Some of the recent shows that I think were really helpful and I think listeners would enjoy, we did one program on beauty, love, and human longing. Which worldview can explain beauty? And we talked a little bit about how atheism struggles to explain beauty, whereas the Christian worldview, it's expected. We also did another program that I really enjoyed. It was on what's the difference between education and propaganda. You know, there's a lot of, in the news today, there are fake news and all these kinds of things. So we did a real careful comparison between what's a good education as opposed to kind of manipulating people. So we talk about philosophy, theology, science, ethics, lots of good stuff on our program.
And who gets to be on your show?
Well, Joe Aguirre is our host, and so he kind of guides the direction. Dave Rogstad is a physicist, so you get kind of me as the philosopher and him as the scientist, and the three of us do the program together.
Oh, that's awesome. So if people have ideas on maybe what they want to see on your show, how could they get that to you? Yeah,
we like to get feedback on the show. We like ideas on the show. They can go to my Facebook page, and I'm on there often, so they can leave some comments or make some suggestions, and I'm happy to entertain them.
Yes. Well, thanks, Ken. So if you go on iTunes and Google Play, you can search Reasons to Believe podcast, and you'll find Ken's Straight Thinking. You can also look for archived Apologia episodes and this awesome 2819 television outreach series. So check out iTunes and Google Play. See you later.
So good news, everyone. Straight Thinking still exists, and you can find it on iTunes and Google Play. Go check it out. That about does it for us this week. Thanks for joining us on 2819.
And we know it can be really kind of scary and intimidating to share our faith these days. So we hope that what you've taken from the show will just really encourage you to step out and share your faith with someone new today.
This show is made possible through the faithful support of Reasons to Believe donors. If you feel led to support resources like this, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And until next time, be sure to check us out on the web. We're at reasons.org. Thousands of articles, podcasts, tons of content, all pointing to how God's world and God's word are in harmony.
And make sure you get connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show. So go ahead, leave us a comment, and let us know what color Sandra should dye her hair next.
We'll see you next week.